Now, what is going on, guys? Today we are going to implement authorization in Node. So that means, how do you actually prevent someone from performing a specific operation that he or she does not have the rights or the privileges for? And this is what we're going to do today. But before we do that, I just want to dive back into the topic of authentication and authorization. And I already have like a pretty long video series on this channel on how to implement a session authentication, so how to log someone in with sessions. And what we're now going to do is we're going to build the authorization, and we're going to build this on top of our session implementation, right? So if you want to block someone because he does not have sufficient rights, then obviously that person needs to be logged in. And one of the ways on how to be logged in is by using a session. Now, I highly encourage you to check out like this series about the sessions. I'm just going to explain it like on a conceptual level here, and then we're just going to reuse what we have written before, and then we're going to implement like a role system basically. So when we're talking about sessions or about authentication, we're talking about logging someone in. And the way this works is you have like some email and some password like on your browser. And what you do is the user fills out the form, you submit like the data, and then you make like some form of request to your servers. For example, like a post request with the credentials. And what your server is going to do is your server is going to check like the password, so what the user has entered, and it's going to hash that password, and it's going to compare it with the password hash that it has stored in the database. So this is like the caveat, right? We don't compare plain text passwords, but we only compare like password hashes, so bcrypt hashes basically. So I cover all of that in the previous series, like where I talk about sessions. And then if the passwords match, what we are going to do is we're going to create like a session which contains a couple of things. So for example, language settings and also the roles typically. And you store that like in your session storage. So for example, in Redis, and then you return like a cookie with a session ID. So once the person logs in and the password hashes match, you create a session which has a specific ID, and you take this ID, put it inside of a cookie and return it. And obviously like the cookie should not be accessible via JavaScript. Yeah. So this is like how you actually log someone in. And what we want to cover today is how do you actually prevent someone from performing like an operation that he or she does not have the rights to. And the way this works is, let's just imagine you are logged in and you want to perform a particular operation that is critical. So for example, you might want to delete an item. And the way that you typically handle this on the server is that you make like this request, and then you somehow check what roles the user has. Okay, so if you have a session implementation, you would fish out like the session from your session storage, and then you would check, okay, what roles does this person have? And if this person has like has sufficient roles, then you allow the operation. However, if the person does not have sufficient roles, you block the operation. In that case, you give back a 4.3 forbidden error. And the important thing here is that this authorization thing, it's not like always coupled to sessions, right? It doesn't matter what authentication flow you use under the hood. You could use any other flow. The only important thing is that you are somehow able to retrieve what roles a particular user has. Okay, so actually this whole flow is kind of like agnostic regarding the underlying authentication flow. So you could have also used JSON Web Tokens, although I would not recommend that because JSON Web Tokens are not like good session tokens. I also have a video on that one where I explain why that is. Okay, and this is what we want to implement today. So we don't want to mess with all the stuff over here. So that's why we can just take the result of this session series and then just build that stuff here on top. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. So let me go to the repo. So I'm going to put the link in the description down below. This is my GitHub. You can see the project over here. And if you go to code, then you can either like download it with HTTPS, or you can just clone it. And this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to open my terminal, and I'm going to say git clone, and then I'm going to paste this. Okay. And I should soon have it. Yes. Okay, so let me open this one up. So what is it called? It's called express session with Redis. Okay. So here it is. Nice. Okay. Let me open like a terminal over here. This one a little bit like this. Or maybe let's do it in here. We can directly npm install all of the dependencies. Oh, I have to first change the directory, and then npm install everything. Okay, so now you should have the result of the series that we did before, and that is going to work. Now, one more thing I want you to know is that in order to actually run this project, you need to have Redis running locally. So if I have Redis running locally, it's called brew services ls, or it's maybe a little bit big like this. So you can see I even have Redis and Postgres running at the moment. And in this repository, in the README, you will find like instructions on how to do this, at least like for Mac OS. So obviously, in order to do all of this, so to store to create the session, we need to store it somewhere in a session storage. And in the previous tutorial, we just used Redis. We could have used any other solution, but Redis is like typically the tool of choice for something like that. So I have Redis already running, and that's why I can just start up this project. So I'm just going to go over here. And I think we have like if you go to the package.json, you can see we have a dev script, and this one has like hot reload. So this is really nice. So I am just going to run npm run dev. And I think you probably don't see the command because my image is here. But yeah, now you can see that it's running on port 8080. And I just want to show you like what we have already. So there is let me go to the routes. There are a couple of endpoints, 3 of them. These ones here. No, it's 2. You can log in. So if you make a post request to /login with the email and the password, and the email and the password is correct, then you are logged in. And then if you make like another follow-up request, then you will be able to get this, or to reach out to this endpoint, which is just going to return the contents of the session, just to show you like what we have. Okay, and I just want to demonstrate that to you. So I'm just going to go to Postman. So I already have like a collection over here. And the important thing is that in this tutorial, we kind of hard coded the users that we have, because I did not want to, connect to a real database and do all of that. So that's why I said, okay, let's just take 2 users, and that's it. Okay, so I'm just going to put this over here. And if I now make like this request, you can see that I have a cookie over here. So first of all, let me delete all of this so that you see it's not a leftover. So if I make this request, you can see over here that we have some form of cookie. And then you can do, I'm just going to duplicate this one. Then you can do, I'm going to take this. I'm going to take profile. And I think we also need to have this origin header, simply because of security reasons. So that means the browser will not take your cookie if you have origin star. So this was like one little detail. So if you now make like this request, bam, you can see what you actually have in the session. So as you can see, we have like an ID and we have like a roles array. And at the moment, this is like admin. So obviously, like on production, you would not return something like that. But yeah, in our tutorial, we do so that we know what's going on. Okay, so this is basically the full recap of what we did before. And the question now is, how do we actually, well, implement all of this authorization logic? And what I want to do here, I'm going to take this terminal. I'm just going to say, I'm going to make a directory and I'm going to call it authorization. And the important point here to realize is that we first have to define what roles we are going to allow. So this is the first thing that we will do. So I'm just going to create a role.js file. And instead of this file, I'm just going to hard code like some roles that I want. So let's see. Let's say we have two roles, okay? Because we want to keep things simple. Let's say I can be a compliance officer, right? So a guy who kind of makes sure that everything works according to like the law and the rules and the guidelines. And I can just copy that. And this is like, yeah, right? So we have a role and the role name is basically compliance officer in all caps. And then let's say we also have customer service. Okay, I'm like, don't worry about these things. They are just arbitrary, more or less. They're like for our example here. So let's just do two roles because otherwise it's going to get really big and I want to keep it as simple and small as possible. Okay, so now we have two roles. So let's say a compliance guy can only read, but a customer service can read, create, and delete something, right? Because the compliance guy is not involved in the day-to-day operations. So that's why he's not allowed to change anything. So to create something or to delete something. And at the moment, we only have this profile route here. And this is what we need to change. So we need like more routes. So I can demonstrate you how that works. So I'm just going to say, okay, I'm going to make a new route. And this time I'm going to not make it like profile, but I'm going to make it /order, right? So we're just going to pretend you're like a company, you have a customer service, and the customer service can take orders, right? So they need to read orders, they need to be able to write orders, so to create new ones in case the customer is on the phone, and they should also be able to delete orders in case like something gets canceled. Okay, so I want to have a GET request to /order. I want to have a POST request to /order, and I also want to have a delete request to /order. Okay, and the idea is that only customer service is allowed to do all of these three, and that the compliance guy is only able to read. So this is like the goal. And the first thing that we want to do is let's just get rid of this. And I'm just going to rename this real quick, right? So I want to rename this to order. And I am going to delete this for now. And I'm going to say, okay, I will have like an order controller. And in case you're wondering why I'm using classes is because typically I am using dependency injection. And there it's kind of handy to have classes. Okay, so I'm just going to create 3 methods. So it's like get an order, create an order, and delete an order. Okay, so these are the methods that we are going to use in the routes that we just created. And since we don't have any dependency injection at the moment, we can just export like one instance. Okay, so this is kind of like, you don't really need that. Technically, you also don't need this class, but later on, if you want to add dependency injection, it might be worthwhile. Okay, and for this order thing, what are we going to do? Well, I think we're just going to hard code like something. We're just going to say type, I don't know, order and content lorem ipsum. Okay, it doesn't really matter. And to create order, we're just going to return, maybe let's return 2 or 1 and then say order created, because that's what you should do, right? you should say, okay, tool1 if it's created, and let's just say here, we'll just say order deleted. Okay, so we're basically pretending like we're doing something, but actually we don't. So now we have this controller, we have these three methods, and now we want to wire them up over here. So for one, I want to have an order controller, right? And this guy, and then I can say here, order controller dot get order. And don't invoke this method. Don't do something like this, but just pass the reference to the method. Okay, and then you can also say order controller dot create, and then you can say order controller dot delete. Okay, and I by accident imported this. So these would be all the three routes that we want to support. So read, create, and delete. And now what we want is we only want to allow someone with a compliance role to kind of like have access to this route, and customer service should have access to all of these three. Obviously, in reality, these things are more complex, but let's just try to keep them simple. Okay, and the question is, how do we actually do that? And now it gets pretty interesting, because this is how you would actually implement an authorization. So I am going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this authorized.js. And this is the actual like logic that you need to understand to authorize it. So the idea is that we want to have, maybe I can show it to you first, that we want to have some middleware where we say, okay, we want to authorize like a particular role. Let me just function authorize, and I'm just going to export this. Then we can already wire it up, you know, and at the moment we're not doing anything, and then we want to import the role, require, just that you know how it's going to look. So we are going to have like this function, and in here we want to pass like all the roles that should have access to this role. Okay, so for example, I want the compliance guy to have access, so I'm going to pass compliance, and I also want customer service. So we can put this inline here because we only have two roles. Obviously, if you have more roles, you want to put like this to a different file. And for the other two, we only want the customer service to be authorized, right? So what we want is like this, and we want role.customer service. And this is how we want to define who has access to what. I don't see it because the camera is just in the way. Is there now a comma? I don't know. Yeah, I think it is. Okay. Yeah. So at the moment we're not doing anything, but I think you get the idea, right? Basically what we're doing is we want to plug in an additional middleware, which is like this authorize function. And this authorize function is going to block you if you don't have the proper route. And if you do have the proper route, you can execute it. And now the valid question is, how does this function look like? So at the moment, what we want is we have a varied parameter. And what this means is this function has an arbitrary amount of parameters, and it's going to be passed as an array. Why? Just because I'm lazy and I don't want to write something like authorize and then pass an array, right? I could have done that as well, but it's kind of ugly. So let's just use this little feature. So to have an arbitrary amount of parameters in the function method or in the function signature. And these are like the roles that I want to allow. Okay, so in that case, when we call this function, we're passing two roles, or maybe we pass one. So we don't know how many are going to be passed. And this one, or roles, is going to be an array. Okay, and now let's think about what we want to do. So for one, what I typically do is I create a set of this. And a set is a hash set, like that's how it's called in Java. So it's basically a data structure that has the same semantics as a set in mathematics. And while that sounds complicated, it basically just means that there are no duplicates in this set. And there's a very specific reasons on why we do that, because one of the reasons is that from this set, you can retrieve or you can check whether an item is contained in that set with a constant amount of time. So it's just a performance kind of thing. Now, if you're not sure what this means, just check out like hashing and check out hash sets in general. So there's like a lot of tutorials. And basically, the thing is, if you have a very long list of roles, you don't want to iterate through all of them to check whether one item is contained in it, but you just want to calculate a hash and then figure out whether it's contained. Okay, and what we are now going to do is we're going to return a function. And this might look a little bit weird because this is a function and this function itself will return a function and it will return a middleware. So that means it's more or less like a middleware factory. So you give it like a couple of parameters and it's going to return you like a custom middleware. And this custom middleware is going to block the request if you don't have sufficient privileges. And the first thing that we want to do, just to be on the safe side, if there's no session, or if there's no session, no user in the session, or if there's no, if there's no requested session.user.roles, then we are going to block right away. And now you might wonder, like, why is this .user and why .roles? Well, it is because we defined it like that. So if you look at the response, so this is the exact session, and what you see is it has like the top level object, and then it has user, and then it has roles. So this is just how I defined it in the project. It could have been defined in a totally different way. So I think if you go to auth, and if you go to auth and to login, you see that we are basically attaching like the data we fetch from our fake database to the user object in the session. That's why it's nested. Like if we had done this, actually we could do that. If we had done this, then we would not have this user object. Okay, but I'm just going to leave it in here. Okay, cool. So now that we have, now that we have all of this, we need to basically return forbidden. And we're going to do this afterwards, okay? So the idea is, if we don't have any information about the roles, we're going to block right away. And now the other question is, well, what happens if we actually do have roles in our session? So user is logged in, there's like a session array inside of the Redis store that is associated with this session. How do we actually check whether that person is authorized or not? And I'm just going to make another function, and I'm going to call it isAuthrized. Okay, and what I'm going to pass is I'm going to pass the actual roles, so the roles that the logged in user has, and the roles that we want to allow. So in our case, the allowed roles is, customer service or compliance, right? So in here, the allowed roles would be compliance officer and customer service. And here the allowed roles would only be customer service. Okay. And now we're going to use a little bit of fancy ES6 syntax. So we're going to say return user roles.sum role and then allowed, oops, I still don't see it because the camera is over here. Over here. Allowed roles.has role. Now this looks a little bit weird, I would assume. So let me just explain what this does. So what we are doing here is we say, okay, we're going to iterate over all the roles that the user has. Okay, so if you're logged in, you have a particular role, and we're going to iterate over these roles. And then we're going to check if at least one of the roles that our user has, so this is basically the sum method, if at least one of the roles a user has is contained in our allowed roles set. And this has method is like a method on the set that we created over here. And just for you guys to know, in case you are concerned about like runtime complexity, right? This is off and runtime where n is the amount of roles the user has. And now you might also see why we are actually using this set. Because if we had not used the set, what would we like? How would we have written it? Or we would need to write it differently. We would need like two loops, right? For one, we would need to loop over the roles that our user has. And then for every role, we would need to check if it's in the allowed roles. So we would actually need to do something like user roles dot, you don't need to write this by the way, for each, and then user role. And then you would need to do something like this, okay? And then you would need to say, okay, now I need to iterate over the allowed roles. No, this is complicated. I'm not going to write it like that. Maybe in a for loop. Maybe it would be easier in a for loop. Okay, so I'm going to say user role in user roles, just for you to understand this. Okay, so we would iterate over, how does this work? I think it works like this. How does this work in JavaScript? I think it's in. You know, sometimes I get confused with different programming languages. So you would need to, like if you want to write this out in a real loop, you would need to say, okay, I iterate over these roles. And if the allowed roles were an array, I would need to say, okay, role in allowed roles. And then you would need to check, okay, if R is the user role, then return true. And as you can see, this would have like two different roles or two different loops, and we want to avoid that. And this is basically the trick with the hash set, because this operation here has like constant runtime, so we save ourselves the inner loop. But that's more like details. And this is assuming obviously that both are arrays. Okay, so let me delete all of this. Cool. So this is like our method, and what we're now going to do is we will need to check if the user is not authorized. Okay, so we're going to check if we're going to pass the user roles, and we're going to pass the allowed roles. Okay, allowed roles is supposed to be a set, obviously. And if the guy is not allowed, then we're going to return forbidden. Maybe it makes more sense to return unauthorized. And if the guy is allowed to do it, we're just going to call next. And we haven't implemented like these two things here yet, but maybe just to recap. Okay, what we do is we first take like the roles that we want to allow. Then we put them inside of a set. And then initially we check if the logged in user has some roles. If he does not have the roles, we block right away. And then if the person has roles, we check whether at least one of the user roles is contained in this set here. And if yes, then the person like can perform the operation. If not, then the person cannot perform the operation. Okay, so these two things, like they will work. Another thing that I want to do here, technically speaking, what we could do is we could do something like, okay, I want to return a 401, and I'm going to say you are not logged in. Okay, so like this. And yeah, I think maybe I'm going to do it like that. Forbidden. Insufficient privileges. privileges. Okay, so in that case, we return unauthorized, and in the second case, we return forbidden. So forbidden means you are logged in, but you don't have the right to perform the operation. And this guy here means you are not logged in, so we can't do anything. And by the way, normally what I would recommend is that you have a dedicated like error handling middleware, and that you do not hard code like these values in here. Yeah, I'm just going to leave them in like that because the video is already 30 minutes. So I also have like a video about error handling, like a note. Please check that one out. This is like how you can handle the errors properly. Maybe I'm going to add it later on, but I don't want to make this video too long after all. Okay, so that's it pretty much, I would say. Yeah. Is there anything else we forgot? I think not. I think we could actually go ahead and try this out. But here's like one problem. Authorized is not defined. Okay. Oh, I didn't import it, right? Const authorize equals require authorization authorize. Okay. Okay, and let's see. Yeah, now it's running. So let's see how that works. Oh, there's one more thing we almost forgot. We need to create users with the proper roles. So I'm going to just hardcode this. So I'm going to say compliance, and I'm going to give this like the compliance role. You know, actually require authorization role. So I don't want to hard code this in there because it's you know, what happens if the name changes. So I'm just going to give this guy like compliance, and here I'm going to give this guy customer service, and I'm just going to call the service, and I'm going to give both password because I don't want to type in different passwords. Okay, something like that. Cool. So now our service is starting, and actually this should already work unless we did like a mistake. So let's try it out. Let's log in as the compliance guy. Okay, so we have compliance and we have password. Let's see. Okay, so now we are logged in. That should be fine. Let's see. We should actually be able to get to make a request to this thing. Yes. So you can see, yes, we can make a request to /order simply because we have like we're authorized to do so. Okay, so everything is the same. Now let's try to create an order. Now remember, we're still logged in as the compliance guy. So let's see whether we implement it correctly. Bam, you see? Nice. So now you can see this guy, like he has like the compliance role. So he's not allowed to log in. And that's why we are immediately blocking him in here. So we just say, oh, sorry, insufficient privileges. So this is where we kind of kick him out. Yeah. And also normally, okay, maybe I'm going to do it later. Let's first, I'm going to implement the proper error handling middleware at the end. Okay, so you can decide whether you want to watch it or not. And let's try with delete. So I'm just going to say, okay, delete, and bam, yeah, we're also forbidden. That's good. Let's try to do it differently. So now we're logged in as customer service, okay? Bam. As you can see, we get a different session cookie. Let's try to make a request. Yes, we have it. Let's try to create something. Bam. And now you see, okay, cool. Apparently, if we are customer service, we can create an order because we allowed them to do so in our server. And we are also allowed to delete an order. At least that's what I think. Yeah, and you can see here that we get like a 200 status code, and in here we got a 201. So everything is fine. Yeah, so this is basically the easiest way of, or the easiest form of implementing an authorization. Now, obviously, this can become much more sophisticated. So, for example, you might not be able to write to like you might not be able to create all orders, but you only might be able to create specific orders, right? So depending on what item we're talking about, you might have different privileges. You can think of this like, think of it like Facebook groups, right? Just because you're an admin in one group doesn't mean like you're an admin in all other groups. So then you need to dynamically load like the roles from the database and that kind of stuff. But I don't want to show it here because it's too complex. So once you understand like this principle here, it's going to work. Yeah, so that's it pretty much for the authorization. I'm just wondering whether I should do this here properly, because I don't want to have it like that. Okay, I'm just going to really quickly do it. Okay. What I want to do is I want to make a directory and I want to call it errors. And the reason I want to do that is I don't want to hard code like these status codes in here. That's very ugly. So I want to create another file which is called ApiError. And by the way, I'm going to do it very quickly, but I already cover in another video on how to do this. So please check out this video if this is a little bit confusing. So I'm going to say code message, and I'm going to say this.code equals code and this.message equals message. So I'm basically going to say I will define that there are specific types of errors, unauthorized, that are expected, and where I want to return the actual error message. Turn new ApiError 401 message. Okay, because what is important typically on a production setup as well is that you do not expose any information on like how your server is actually working, because this is dangerous, right? People can hack you. And that's why you want to be very careful with what you return as an error message, because you never know if the person who's actually using the service actually wants to hack you or is like malicious in any way. And that's why we just define, okay, we just define an ApiError class. We say it has a few static methods. So if I call this, it's going to return an ApiError, just an instance of this class. And then I'm going to say ApiError handler. And this is, by the way, best practice. So every node server that you write really, yeah, I don't want to say should. I would actually say it must have, it's a must in my opinion. But technically speaking, it's not a must, because you can write a server without having an error handler, but it's just a very bad idea. So this is like an error request response next. And by the way, an error handling middleware has like this additional error parameter, right? So normally you have request response next, and the error handling, or the error handler has the error property over here. And I'm just going to log this. By the way, again, I think I've mentioned this 5,000 times in prod. Do not use console log or console error or console warn or whatever. Console warn, because they're not synchronous, because they're not async. So they're blocking the main thread, and you don't want to have that. So what I'm just going to say is, if the error that I'm receiving is an instance of ApiError, so that means if it is an expected error, I'm just going to return like the error code, and I'm going to return the exact error message. And I'm going to return. And then if not, I'm just going to say, oops, something went wrong. Here, something went wrong. Oops, like this. And by the way, some people say, oh, but you could do it like this. Yes, but it looks very confusing, because this thing here, it's like a callback. And, you know, like you don't want to return like this thing, because the return value is actually like undefined. So you actually only have this return to kind of bail out of this method. Okay. Cool. So you're still with me? Okay, yeah, so now you have this error handler over here, and the only thing we got to do now is we got to plug this thing in. So we ApiError handler require, and then is it errors? And then ApiError handler, and then I'm going to say app.use ApiError handler. And now what we can do, and you might wonder, like, why do we do all of that? Well, the reason is that we can now get rid of these hard-coded status codes. So we can say API error, require errors, API error. I'm going to do, you see I'm doing this as fast as I can because I don't want to annoy you. And unauthorized, you are not logged in. Oops. Yeah, like this. And here I'm going to say API error dot forbidden. Forbidden. You don't insufficient privileges. Okay, cool. So that's it pretty much. I hope this works. There's one more thing we can do in this project, but it's actually more related to the course middleware. So as you can see here, in this course middleware, we can actually make use of this as well. So I'm going to say, wait, errors, API error. So the thing is, sometimes you will forget, like in your Postman, to actually set dot unauthorized blocked by course. So I just wanted to do this for the sake of completeness, because sometimes if you're trying this out on your own and you forget to put like the course header, so in the Postman over here, then you're going to get like a weird error message. And I just want to return a proper error message, so in case you're running this on your local machine, you know what's going on. Okay, so hopefully this now works. Let's just try it out again. So I'm going to log in as service. I'm going to get like the order that works. I'm going to post an order that should also work. Okay, and then the delete order. Okay, let's try it out as well. It will work. And let's say compliance. Okay, now I'm logged in as compliance, and yeah, now I can read, but I should still be blocked over here. Yes, perfect. Yeah, I kind of put this at the end because I don't want to, you know, teach you like bad code. So always make sure you got like this API error handler over here without the console log. Use a proper logging library. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's it pretty much. This is how you implement like a simple form of authorization. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. If you have any questions, just let me know. I'm going to try to answer as like in the best way I can. You can also send me a tweet. My Twitter handle is @productioncoder. So thank you so much for watching. Like I'm glad you sticked around for so long. I hope it was useful. I hope you kind of now understand, okay, you have authentication, which is like logging in. And then on top of this, you build like the authorization, which is you block someone if he or she does not have the proper rights. Yeah, so thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video, guys. Bye bye.